I place my finger at the red circle on the map. This is where we are. I drag it from the circle, across London, all the way up and beyond Cambridge until the tip of my finger lands at Huntingdon. This is where we need to get to. They lean in across the table and peer closer at where my finger points. There's one hell of a way to go, Roy says and leans away from the table. Yeah, I sigh. Better yet, how do we get there? From what we saw, we can't go through central London. Farina circles the central area of London with her finger. That's a pretty big area we can't get through. I guess there are always tunnels we could use, but do we want to go through Ground Zero? I say. Oh, hell no. Roy shakes his head. So we go around, I say. Surely there must be somewhere we can cross the Thames and head north. We could go out towards Greenwich and see if we can cross anywhere there, Francis suggests with a nod towards the map. Okay, it's not a bad plan. But how do we get there? We can still drive the pickup, Roy says. Don't count on it, Noah snorts. Yeah, there's no guarantee roads won't be crammed, Farina agrees. London traffic is a nightmare, with or without a terror attack. One car stops on the M11 and it completely blocks the rest of the route up. It's a nightmare. Now you double that car by hundreds, Noah says, and I can almost imagine the shit show it would be trying to drive through this mess. What about bikes? I ask. Biking all the way up to Huntingdon is probably one of my worst nightmares, but it sure as hell beats walking up there. Or, as it would most likely end up being, running. We left the bikes at the church, Angela points out. Maybe one of your neighbours has bikes we could borrow. Roy looks at me. Borrow bikes? From neighbours? I laugh. Where's this guy from? We're in London. We don't talk to our neighbours, let alone ask to borrow their bikes. I have two, and I'm sure we can borrow bikes from the neighbours who've already left. Oh, Roy chortles. You mean borrow? Don't let my wife hear that. I'm right here, hon. Angela pats him on the shoulder and side-eyes him. I laugh. If they're not here, they're not going to miss them. You all right? She asked, her eyes still on the road. If they were lucky, this would lead them away from the infected rioters and to the suburbs. Wig is still in place, so I believe so. If she wasn't busy driving like a car thief, Liv would have turned to the nurse, but she thought she could detect the faintest of smiles in the voice. That makes two of us. She smiled despite everything, then shook her head. What a mess. Francis nodded. What do we do with Andy? We can't go back to St. Thomas. Liv kept her eyes on the empty road. The military had done a good job of keeping cars from reaching this part of the city. What really happened at St. Thomas? Why exactly can't we go there? I don't know, Francis said, but Liv could hear the slight hesitation in the nurse's voice. No, she shook her head. No more lies. Tell me. I don't know. I wasn't one of the nurses working in the quarantine. The only thing I know is that the hospital set one up. A new kind of virus. A quarantine? Liv's brows pulled together. Last time a quarantine was set up in England was during the Ebola outbreak. Could it be something like that? I was finishing my shift when it all started. Francis's voice was low as she spoke. I heard the most horrendous screaming when Andy came running from the main area. Then it all went so fast. He blocked the doors and told me to run. Farina presses herself flush against the wall, her eyes wide behind her goggles, and I realize it wasn't the infected talking. It was Farina. The wall is covered in thick, wet-looking roots. The biggest roots are pale pink, like worms, and they move ever so slightly. I point, drawing the other's attention to her, then motion at the infected. We need to take it out before it notices us. Unease tightens my stomach. Something isn't right about this one. The heaving stops as if it can hear my thoughts, and it turns its head towards us. It tosses its head back and forth, clouds of spores puffing from the cracks and crevices that carve through the bulging body. Keith lifts his rifle, but Farina's curls bob around her face as she shakes her head, her eyes wide. She points to her side, careful not to draw the thing's attention. Wait. I wave my hands at Keith, his brows lower. I motion to where Farina points. James follows my finger with his torch. 3 withered loom near the wall only a few steps away from Farina, eerily still and slightly hunched. They're smaller than the big one right in front of us. Roots and tumours grow in thick clusters all over their heads, pushing milky eyeballs from their sockets. Yellow stems with tiny capsules grow like moss on rocks.